had been married for 2 years, yet in all that time my husband never touched me, not even once. It still feels unreal to admit it, but it was the truth of my life. The very first night of our marriage, when most brides step into a new chapter filled with warmth, closeness, and dreams, my night ended differently. I had walked into the room with a heart full of hope, nervous but excited, believing we were about to begin our journey as husband and wife. But instead of welcoming me into his arms, he turned away. He lay down on his side of the bed, his back facing me, and soon drifted into sleep, leaving me in complete confusion and silence. First, I told myself that maybe he was just tired. Weddings are exhausting, and perhaps he only needed rest. I tried to be patient, believing that the next day would be different. But the next day came and nothing changed. Days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, yet the distance between us remained the same. He would talk to me politely, even kindly at times, but there was no intimacy, no tenderness, no touch that would make me feel like his wife. Every night became a test of my patience. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, waiting for a moment that never arrived. I would glance at him, hoping he might reach for my hand, pull me closer, or even simply smile at me in the way husbands do when they are in love. But nothing happened. He would close his eyes and turn away, as if I were invisible. The bed we shared felt like a wall dividing us, and with each passing night, the wall only grew taller and colder. The silence between us weighed heavily on my heart. I began to question myself. Was something wrong with me? Was I not attractive enough? Did I do something to push him away? My self-confidence slowly began to break down. I looked into the mirror and searched for flaws, wondering if he secretly regretted marrying me. I was desperate for answers but too afraid to ask the questions. I had grown up believing that marriage was about love, companionship, and building a life together. I had dreamed of laughter in the mornings, shared meals, whispered conversations late at night, and arms that would hold me when I felt weak. But in reality, my marriage was a lonely place. I lived in the same house as my husband, but I felt as if I were completely alone. Family and friends would often ask me how married life was treating me. I smiled and pretended everything was fine, because how could I tell them the truth? How could I admit that my husband had never once touched me, never once made me feel like his partner? The shame of it burned inside me, and I chose silence over exposure. Deep down, however, the confusion gnawed at me. Why was he this way? Was he hiding something? Did he not love me at all? Sometimes I even wondered if he had married me only to satisfy family expectations, with no real intention of being a husband to me. Other times I thought maybe he was struggling with something personal, something he was too afraid to share. Despite all my pain, a part of me still hoped. I held on to the idea that one day he might open his heart, one day he might finally see me, not just as a wife on paper, but as a woman who longed for his love. But as months slipped away and we reached 2 years of marriage, that hope began to fade. I was living in a relationship that looked whole from the outside but was painfully empty on the inside. The most painful part was the contradiction of it all. To the world, we appeared to be a happily married couple. We attended family gatherings together, shared meals, and smiled for photographs. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. We were strangers sharing a roof, bound by vows that had never been fulfilled. That single memory of our wedding night, when he turned away from me, never left my mind. It became the symbol of everything that followed. A reminder that the love I had hoped for had never been given. And though 2 years had passed, my heart still remained in that moment. Confused, empty, and waiting for an answer I feared might never come. To everyone else, we appeared to be the perfect couple. When we went out in public, he played the role of a loving husband effortlessly. He held my hand, not too tightly but just enough to convince others that there was warmth between us. At family gatherings, he smiled for pictures, posed beside me, and even rested his hand gently on my shoulder, as though he wanted the world to see how close we were. In conversations, he said all the right words. He called me my wife with pride in his voice, asked if I was comfortable, and showed concern for my well-being in front of others. To those watching, our marriage looked flawless, enviable even, a union built on love and respect. But that was only the surface, a carefully painted picture meant for the eyes of the world. Behind the closed doors of our home, especially in the stillness of our bedroom, a different story unfolded. The same man who smiled beside me in photographs would turn his back to me the moment the camera lights faded. The hand that held mine in public would slip away as soon as we crossed our doorstep. His voice, warm and caring outside, became cold and distant within the four walls of our house. Our bedroom was not a place of comfort or closeness. It was a battlefield of silence. Each night I would lie there waiting, hoping that he might finally bridge the distance between us. But instead he withdrew further. His body faced away from mine, his breathing slow and steady, as though sleep came to him easily while I lay wide awake, drowning in questions. The silence was deafening, louder than any argument could ever be. It pressed against me like a weight I could not lift. There were no fights, no shouting matches, no broken dishes. Instead there was nothing, just an empty space where love should have been. And in many ways that nothingness was more painful than anger would have been. At least anger carries emotion, passion, some trace of connection. But this silence carried nothing at all. It was a void, and it grew wider every single night. The contrast between public appearances and private reality tore at my soul. When people admired us, calling us a beautiful couple or commenting on how happy we seemed, I forced a smile and nodded, even though my heart ached with the weight of a truth I couldn't share. It felt like I was living in two different marriages, the one the world believed in and the one I endured alone. Sometimes I wondered if he acted out of obligation or fear of judgment. Perhaps he wanted to protect his image, to avoid the questions that would surely come if people noticed something wrong. Whatever his reasons, his performance in public only deepened my loneliness in private. Each smile he gave to others was a reminder of the smile he never gave to me when we were alone. Each time he called me my wife proudly before others, I longed for him to say those words softly in the privacy of our room, not as an act but as an expression of genuine love. Night after night, the silence became harder to bear. I tried to break it at times, speaking softly, asking questions, or trying to touch his hand under the covers. But he would remain still, pretending to be asleep or offering short answers that closed the door to conversation. The rejection was not loud, but it was constant. It seeped into my bones, making me feel invisible, unwanted, and unloved. And yet no one knew. To the world, we were a picture-perfect couple. People envied me, thinking I lived a life filled with love and care. They saw the hand-holding, the smiles, the gentle gestures in public. But they never saw the tears I cried quietly in the darkness. The ache that grew in my chest as I realized that my marriage existed only as an illusion. I lived in a performance and the stage was my life. But when the curtains closed and the world could no longer see us, I was left with nothing but silence. And in that silence my heart slowly broke piece by piece. At every family gathering the question would come, always in the same soft, hopeful whisper from my mother. "Any good news?" She asked it with a gentle smile, her eyes full of expectation, as though she could already see me cradling a baby in my arms. It was a question born out of love, out of her eagerness to see me step into motherhood. Yet to me those words felt like sharp needles pressing into wounds I tried so hard to hide. Each time she asked, my cheeks would burn with shame. I would force a smile, pretending her question didn't pierce my heart. I would shake my head lightly or laugh it off, giving her the impression that we were simply waiting for the right time. But inside the truth crushed me. How could I tell her the reality, that after 2 years of marriage, my husband had never even kissed me passionately, let alone given me the chance to dream of children? The gatherings were supposed to be times of joy, filled with laughter, food, and family warmth. But for me, they became reminders of everything my marriage was missing. When I watched my cousins with their husbands, holding hands, sharing inside jokes, or chasing their toddlers around the room, my heart twisted with envy and sorrow. I would plaster a smile on my face, clapping and laughing along, but a storm raged silently within me. My mother's question was not cruel. She had no idea of the pain it caused. To her it was natural to ask. She assumed my marriage was normal, healthy, and filled with love. She assumed that 2 years into married life, it was only natural to expect the sound of little feet echoing through our home. But the truth was so different, so painful, and so shameful that I couldn't bring myself to share it. How could I look into her eyes, the same eyes that once taught me about hope, trust, and love, and tell her that her daughter's marriage was hollow? How could I admit that the man she trusted to take care of me had built walls of silence between us? She would be heartbroken. And more than that, I was afraid she would blame me. Perhaps she would think I had done something wrong, that I had failed as a wife. The thought of disappointing her, of letting her down, silenced me every single time. So I carried the weight alone. I smiled through my shame. I let her believe what she wanted to believe because the truth was too heavy for both of us. Every time she whispered those words, "Any good news?" I felt my throat tighten. My heart screamed the truth, but my lips refused to move. I simply nodded, deflecting, pretending, while inside I crumbled. The shame was not just about what others expected, it was about my own sense of worth. A marriage is meant to be a union of love, intimacy, and companionship. But mine was only a performance. On the outside, I wore the role of a wife, but inside I felt like nothing more than a guest in my husband's life. I longed for affection, for a touch, for the warmth of being desired. But what I received was coldness, distance, and silence. Every family gathering became a stage where I acted out the role of a happy wife, while secretly drowning in loneliness. I would watch my husband across the room, laughing and talking with others, perfectly charming in front of the family, and no one would ever suspect that when we returned home, the silence between us would once again fill the space where love should have been. I carried my mother's question home with me each time, like a shadow that followed me into the night. "Any good news?" The words replayed in my head as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. And every time I looked at my husband, sleeping peacefully beside me, I wondered if the day would ever come when I could give her the answer she longed to hear. But deep down I knew. How could there be good news when my husband had never even kissed me passionately? At first I convinced myself that he was just shy. Some men, I told myself, take longer to open up. Maybe he needed time to adjust to the idea of being married. I thought perhaps his quietness and distance were not rejection, but simply his way of slowly easing into the rhythm of sharing his life with someone else. I assured myself that love would come naturally with patience, that one day he would surprise me with tenderness, and that our marriage would eventually bloom the way I had always imagined it would. Then, as the weeks slipped into months, I created another explanation in my mind. Maybe he was waiting for the right time. Perhaps he wanted our first moments of intimacy to be special, to mean something deeper. I thought he might be waiting for a certain occasion, our first anniversary, a holiday, or maybe a time when he felt ready in his own heart. I told myself not to pressure him, that his hesitation was simply his way of being thoughtful. I believed that when the right time arrived, he would take my hand, look into my eyes, and finally let me feel what it meant to be his wife. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into years, that right time never came. 2 years passed and still I waited. Every night was the same silence, the same turning away, the same emptiness that filled the space between us. My hope, once strong and certain, began to weaken. The explanations I had carefully built started to crumble. Shyness cannot last forever. Waiting for the right moment cannot stretch on endlessly. There was no reason left that could explain why my husband remained so distant from me. And that was when my heart turned inward. Maybe I thought the problem was me. The thought haunted me day and night. Had I done something wrong? Was I lacking in beauty, in charm, in the qualities that make a woman desirable? I would stand in front of the mirror and study myself, searching for flaws I had never noticed before. Maybe my smile wasn't bright enough. Maybe my body wasn't attractive enough. Maybe my voice, my laugh, my very presence failed to stir any feelings in him. Every insecurity I had buried deep inside began to rise, fueled by the coldness of his silence. It was a painful spiral. The more I wondered if I was the problem, the more distant I felt from myself. My confidence, once strong, began to collapse. I compared myself to other women, my friends, my cousins, even strangers passing by on the street. They all seemed to glow with a kind of beauty and confidence that I felt I lacked. I thought of how their husbands looked at them, held their hands, or whispered into their ears. I longed for even a fraction of that closeness. Inside I was breaking. 2 years of waiting, 2 years of excuses, 2 years of convincing myself to be patient had left me empty. I could no longer believe that time alone would fix this. Love does not grow in silence. Passion does not wait forever. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to confront him directly. I was terrified of the answer he might give. What if he confirmed my deepest fear, that I was, in fact, the problem? So I stayed silent, carrying the weight alone. Outwardly, I smiled and pretended nothing was wrong. Inwardly, I drowned in doubts. I replayed every moment of our marriage in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed, clues that could explain why he kept me at arm's length. But the truth remained hidden, and all I had was the unbearable ache of feeling unwanted. 2 years of marriage had not given me the joy I once dreamed of. Instead, they had given me questions that tore at my heart. And the cruelest of all was the one that echoed endlessly in my mind. What if the problem was me all along? Nights became unbearable for me. They stretched on endlessly, each hour slower than the one before. Each minute a reminder of what I was missing. I would lie in bed with my eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, my heart heavy with longing. The silence of the night should have been peaceful, but instead it felt suffocating. The only sound that filled the room was the steady rhythm of his breathing, calm and even, as though he carried no burden, no ache, no awareness of the storm raging inside me. I would listen to that breathing for hours, wishing desperately that it would change, that I would hear the shift of the mattress as he turned toward me, that his arm would stretch across the distance and finally hold me close. I longed for even the smallest gesture, a brush of his hand against mine, the warmth of his touch, or a simple whisper of comfort. I told myself that one word from him, any word at all, could soothe the ache in my chest. But the words never came. Each night I hoped, and each night I was disappointed. It was not the kind of disappointment that explodes in anger. It was quieter, deeper, and far more painful. It was the kind that eats away at your soul slowly, leaving you emptier with every passing day. The bed we shared was wide enough to hold both of us, yet I had never felt so far from him. The space between us was small in distance but enormous in meaning. It was the space where love should have lived, but where only silence remained. I began to dread the nights. During the day I could distract myself with chores, conversations, and small tasks that kept my mind occupied. But when the sun set and the house grew quiet, I could no longer hide from my reality. The darkness pressed against me, and I felt my loneliness more deeply than ever. I would turn toward him, watching the outline of his body in the faint light, waiting for any sign that he might turn back toward me. But he never did. Sometimes I whispered his name softly, just to see if he would stir. But he didn't move. Other times I reached out, my hand hovering inches above his back, wanting to touch him, to close the gap between us. But fear always pulled me back. What if he rejected me again? What if he pulled away? I couldn't bear another reminder that I was unwanted. So I withdrew, curling into myself, hugging my own body as if to replace the embrace I had been denied. The silence of those nights became my cruelest enemy. It made me question everything. My worth, my beauty, my very place in his life. Why wouldn't he touch me? Why wouldn't he speak to me? Was I not enough for him? Did he regret marrying me? These questions circled endlessly in my mind, and with each night that passed, they grew louder. There is a special kind of pain in lying next to someone and still feeling alone. The presence of his body only deepened my loneliness. If he had not been there at all, perhaps I could have told myself a different story. But his nearness without intimacy was unbearable. It was a reminder of what I should have had but never did. And so, night after night, I endured the same cycle. I lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, hoping it might falter, that he might wake up and see me, truly see me. But he never did. The silence grew heavier, the distance grew colder, and my heart grew weaker under the weight of longing that was never returned. The nights became unbearable not just because of the silence, but because of what that silence represented. The absence of love, of connection, of the very intimacy that should have bound us together. And as I lay there staring into the darkness, I wondered how much longer I could bear it before the silence finally broke me completely. Neighbors began to gossip. At first I tried to ignore it, brushing off the whispers I sometimes caught when I passed by. But soon the words grew louder, impossible to silence. They've been married 2 years and no children yet? Something must be wrong. The sentence carried a casual cruelty, as though spoken without thought, but to me it cut deeper than knives. In our community, children were seen as the natural next step after marriage, almost like proof that the union was real and successful. A woman's worth was often measured by how quickly she could bring life into the world, and people rarely stopped to think about how heavy that expectation could feel. Whenever I walked past neighbors, I could feel their eyes on me. Their smiles seemed polite, but I sensed the questions hiding behind them. Why not yet? What is taking so long? Could there be a problem? The gossip didn't stop at whispers in the streets. At gatherings, it slipped into conversations like an unwelcome guest. Someone would joke lightly about how it was time for me to bring a baby to the family. Others would ask directly, their tone laced with curiosity rather than concern. Each question was like a fresh wound, reopening the pain I carried inside but could never share. If only they knew the truth. If only they understood that the absence of children was not a choice, not a delay, not hesitation. It was the result of a marriage that had never truly begun. How could I tell them that in 2 years, my husband had never even kissed me passionately, let alone given me the intimacy required to build a family? Their gossip was cruel not just because it questioned me, but because it reminded me of a reality I tried desperately to hide. I found myself avoiding neighbors, keeping my head down, and limiting conversations. I no longer lingered outside for casual chats, because I feared the direction the talk might take. I pulled away from gatherings, offering excuses about being busy when in truth I just didn't want to hear the questions anymore. My world grew smaller as I built walls to protect myself from their words. But even within my walls, their voices echoed. Late at night, I would remember the way they looked at me, the way their whispers floated in the air, and I would feel shame flooding through me. It wasn't just their gossip. It was the way it confirmed my deepest fears. Maybe something was wrong. Maybe the problem wasn't only my husband's distance, but me too. Their words pressed against the cracks already forming in my self-esteem, breaking me down piece by piece. The hardest part was that I had no one to confide in. My mother asked gentle questions, full of love and hope, but I couldn't bear to disappoint her with the truth. My friends assumed my marriage was happy because from the outside it looked perfect. And so I carried the weight alone, smiling on the outside while bleeding quietly on the inside. It amazed me how easily people could wound others without realizing it. To them, their gossip was harmless curiosity, a bit of small talk to fill the silence. But to me it was everything. It was a reminder that my marriage was broken, that my dreams of family were slipping further away, that I was living a lie I could not escape. Their words didn't just sting for a moment. They lingered, sinking deep into my heart, becoming scars I couldn't erase. Each time I heard someone say, Something must be wrong. I wanted to shout back, yes, something is wrong, but not in the way you think. I wanted to tell them about the cold nights, the silence, the distance that grew wider every day. But instead, I kept quiet, swallowing my truth because I knew their curiosity was not the same as compassion. They did not want to understand, they only wanted to talk. And so their words cut me deeper than knives, leaving wounds no one could see. I carried those wounds with me, hidden beneath forced smiles and polite nods, while inside, I wondered how long I could endure the weight of being judged for something I had no power to change. One evening, after carrying the weight of silence for far too long, I finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been burning inside me. My voice trembled, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, but the words slipped out before I could stop them. Do you even want me? Am I not enough? It was a desperate plea, not just for an answer but for reassurance, for proof that the distance between us was not my fault. For days, months, even years, I had tried to convince myself that his coldness wasn't about me. I told myself he was tired, stressed, or maybe just shy. I told myself that with time things would change, that eventually he would reach for me, hold me, and love me in the way a husband should. But the silence stretched on, night after night, until my heart felt like it was breaking under the weight of questions I never dared to ask. Until that evening, when the words finally escaped my lips, the room seemed to freeze. He looked at me, his eyes locking onto mine, and for a moment I thought I saw the truth. His eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Was it pain? Was it anger? Or was it fear? I searched his face for an answer, some sign of what he felt for me, but his expression gave nothing away. It was as if his emotions were trapped behind a wall I could never climb, locked away in a place I was not allowed to enter. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. He said nothing. Not a single word to reassure me, not a touch to comfort me, not even a denial to defend himself. Just silence. And that silence was worse than any cruel truth he could have spoken. It was emptiness, a void that told me more clearly than words ever could that something was deeply broken between us. I wanted him to reach for me, to hold my face in his hands and tell me I was enough, that I mattered, that I was loved. I wanted him to laugh softly and say I was being silly, that he had always wanted me, that he had just been waiting for the right time to show it. I wanted any response that would have given me hope, but instead I was left staring at the emptiness between us, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. His silence played in my head long after that evening ended. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the look in his eyes. If it was pain, why couldn't he share it with me? If it was anger, what had I done to deserve it? And if it was fear, then what was he afraid of? Questions spun through my mind like a storm, but none of them found answers. His silence became its own kind of response, one that echoed louder than any words. That night I realized something terrifying. Love cannot survive without communication. A marriage cannot breathe if it is suffocated by silence. I had given him my heart, my trust, my devotion, but in return, I was left with uncertainty. His silence made me feel invisible, like my feelings didn't matter, like I wasn't worthy of honesty. And yet, even as my heart ached, a part of me still hoped. Hoped that one day he would explain, that he would open up and let me into the mystery of his heart. But hope is fragile. Each unanswered question, each quiet night, each empty look chipped away at it until it became almost too small to hold on to. Still, I clung to it because the alternative, the idea that he truly didn't want me, was too painful to accept. I loved him, and love, even when bruised and broken, has a way of holding on longer than it should. That evening became a turning point in my memory. It was the night I stopped pretending everything was fine. It was the night I admitted, at least to myself, that something was terribly wrong. And though his silence hurt, though it carved scars deep into my soul, it also gave me clarity. I deserved answers. I deserved love. I deserved more than silence. And yet, even with all that clarity, I stayed. Because love, when it has taken root in your heart, does not let go easily. It clings to the faintest hope, to the smallest chance, to the tiniest spark that maybe someday things will change. I started crying myself to sleep. At first, the tears came quietly, just a few drops slipping down my cheeks in the darkness, where no one could see or hear me. But as nights turned into weeks and weeks into months, the tears grew heavier, harder to control, until they became part of my nightly routine. My pillow carried the proof of my pain, damp with the sorrow I could not share with anyone. I felt like I was slowly falling apart, and the only witness to my collapse was the silent night around me. My body craved love. It was not just a longing but a deep ache, a physical emptiness that grew heavier with each day of rejection. I longed for the warmth of a touch, the comfort of being held close, the simple reassurance that comes from being wanted. Every time he turned away from me in bed, every time he kept his distance, my body screamed for something it never received. It wasn't about desire alone. It was about connection, about being seen and cherished in the way a wife should be. My heart craved intimacy. I wanted more than just physical closeness. I wanted emotional closeness too. I wanted to share my dreams with him, my fears, my laughter, and my tears. I wanted late-night talks that stretched until morning, whispered secrets shared in the dark, and the kind of bond that made us feel like we were two souls joined as one. Instead, what I had was silence, distance, and walls I couldn't break through. My heart yearned for something that seemed to slip further away every day. And my soul craved answers. Why was he this way? Why did he push me away? Why did he keep me at arm's length, when all I ever wanted was to love him completely? I tortured myself with questions that had no answers. Was it me? Was I unattractive? Had I done something wrong? Or was it something about him that I would never understand? My soul ached not just from loneliness, but from confusion, from the unbearable weight of not knowing the truth. The emptiness was destroying me. It wasn't the kind of emptiness you could fill with distractions or cover with a smile. It was the kind that seeped into every part of life, coloring everything gray. Food lost its taste. Music lost its meaning. Even laughter felt hollow, like a sound forced out of a body too tired to feel joy. Every day I played the role of a happy wife, smiling for others, pretending everything was fine, while inside, I felt like a fragile shell barely holding together. I began to dread the nights most of all. The day kept me busy, chores, work, conversations with others, but when night came, the silence of our bedroom became unbearable. I would lie awake, staring into the darkness, listening to his steady breathing beside me. He slept so easily, so peacefully, while I lay broken just inches away, craving a closeness he refused to give. Sometimes I wanted to shake him, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I couldn't. Instead, I cried silently, letting my pain spill out in tears he never noticed. Crying myself to sleep became a habit, and with each night, a little piece of me faded. I started to lose confidence, to feel less like a wife, and more like a stranger living in my own home. I questioned my worth, my beauty, my purpose. The reflection in the mirror no longer looked like me. It looked like someone hollow, someone who had lost her spark. And the saddest part was that the person I needed most to notice my pain, my husband, seemed completely unaware. Sometimes I wondered if he even cared. Did he not see my tears? Did he not feel the distance growing wider between us? Or did he choose to ignore it because facing the truth was harder than pretending everything was fine? These questions haunted me, chasing me into my dreams, where even in sleep I found no peace. The emptiness was not just inside me, it was inside our marriage. It became a shadow that followed us everywhere, a silence that grew louder than words. And as I cried myself to sleep night after night, I wondered how much longer I could endure it. Because love is supposed to heal, but what I had was a love that was breaking me, slowly, painfully, and silently. One day while I was doing laundry, Something happened that changed the way I looked at my husband, my marriage, and even myself. I had gone into his closet to put away some of his clothes, just like I had done countless times before. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The neatly hung shirts, the folded trousers, the shoes lined up at the bottom. But as I moved some things around, my hand brushed against a small panel at the back of the closet. Curious, I pushed against it, and to my surprise it slid open, revealing a hidden drawer I had never seen before. My heart began to race as I reached inside. Tucked neatly inside were letters, old photographs, and a small velvet box. At first I thought maybe it was something harmless, perhaps childhood keepsakes or family heirlooms. But as I opened the letters, my chest tightened. They were not addressed to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar, flowing and delicate, filled with words of love and longing. Each sentence felt like a dagger, reminding me that there was a part of my husband I had never known. A life that existed before me but had been carefully hidden away. The photographs made my hands tremble even more. They showed him with a woman I did not recognize. In some pictures they were smiling, holding hands, looking at each other with a tenderness I had longed to see directed at me. There was laughter in his eyes, a light I had rarely seen in the years we had been together. And then came the final blow, the ring. A delicate piece of jewelry, clearly meant for a woman, nestled safely in its box as if waiting for the day it would once again find its rightful hand. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my breathing uneven, my mind spinning. The realization hit me like a storm. He had been hiding a past life, a history he had never shared with me, a woman, a love, maybe even a promise. And suddenly so many things made sense. His distance, his silence, the coldness that filled our marriage. It wasn't just me he was shutting out. It was as though he had locked a piece of his heart away in that drawer, never to be given again. My hands trembled as I held the letters and photographs, my tears blurring the faces in the pictures. Who was she? What had she meant to him? Why had he hidden all of this from me? The questions came rushing in, crashing over me like waves, each one harder than the last. If he had loved her once, did he still love her now? Was she the reason he couldn't love me? Anger surged through me, hot and sharp. I wanted to confront him right then and there, to throw the letters and photographs at his feet and demand answers. But fear held me back. What if the truth was worse than I could bear? What if he admitted he still loved her? What if he confessed that he had married me out of obligation, not love? The thought made my stomach twist. At the same time, sorrow weighed heavily on my chest. I had spent years blaming myself, wondering if I was the problem, if I was unworthy of his affection. But now, with the drawer open before me, I realized that maybe it had never been about me at all. Maybe his heart had belonged to someone else long before I came into his life, and I had been living in the shadow of a love story I knew nothing about. The discovery left me shaken, unable to move, my laundry basket forgotten on the floor. I clutched the ring in my hand, staring at it as if it might give me the answers I desperately needed. But it remained silent, a symbol of a love I would never understand. That day, the ground beneath my marriage cracked. I could no longer see my husband in the same way. Every smile, every silence, every moment of distance suddenly carried a new weight. The hidden drawer had revealed not just a past life, but a truth I wasn't ready to face. I had been sharing my life with a man who still carried pieces of someone else in his heart. And as I stood there trembling, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever feel the same again. There she was, a beautiful woman, captured in a photograph that froze time in a way words never could. She had a radiant smile, the kind that seemed to light up not just her face but the entire moment around her. Her arms were wrapped around him, holding him close, as if he belonged to her in a way I had never been able to claim. And the worst part was not just the picture itself, but the undeniable joy in his eyes as he stood beside her. It was a look I had longed to see directed at me, but in all our years of marriage, I had never seen that kind of warmth, that kind of effortless happiness on his face. I turned the photograph over, my fingers trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. On the back, in his handwriting, were two simple words. My forever. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving me gasping, drowning in a truth I wasn't ready to face. That phrase, my forever, was everything I had wanted from him, everything I had been waiting to hear. But he had given it to someone else. In that instant, my world collapsed. Every memory of our marriage flashed before my eyes, each one now painted with a new, painful light. The coldness in his touch, the silence in our bedroom, the distance in his eyes. It all made sense now. He had never truly been mine. His heart had belonged to her all along, locked away in a memory he couldn't let go of, hidden in a drawer I was never meant to find. The photograph slipped from my hands and landed softly on the floor, but the sound it made echoed in my mind like a thunderclap. My knees felt weak, my chest heavy, as if my body couldn't carry the weight of what I had just uncovered. How could I compete with a ghost from the past, with a woman who had once been his forever? How could I continue to believe in a marriage that had been built on a lie, on half a heart? I sank onto the floor, clutching the letters and photographs like they were evidence in a case I had never agreed to be part of. My tears blurred the image of her face, but no matter how much I cried, I couldn't erase her. She was real. She had been loved. And judging by the words on the back of that photo, she had been everything to him. Questions raced through my mind, each one more painful than the last. Who was she? Why had he hidden her from me? What had happened between them? Was she still alive, still somewhere in his heart, waiting to reclaim the love he had once promised her? Or had she left him, leaving him broken, unable to give me the love I so desperately craved? The not knowing was torture, 1,000 sharp blades cutting into me at once. I thought of all the times I had blamed myself. For years I had believed I was the reason for his distance. I had wondered if I was unattractive, if I was unworthy of intimacy, if I was simply not enough. But now, staring at the words my forever, I realized the truth was so much crueler. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that he had already given his love away, and there was nothing left for me. The betrayal wasn't just in his silence or his coldness. It was in the fact that he had let me believe we had a chance, when in reality, he had been holding on to someone else. It was in the way he had stood beside me at the altar, promising forever, when in his heart, forever had already been given. I picked up the photograph again, staring at the words written in his hand. They were so final, so certain. My forever. Not my love. Not my darling. But forever. A word that meant permanence, a word that meant she was the one he intended to keep in his heart until the end of time. And where did that leave me? A placeholder? A shadow? A wife in name only, trapped in a marriage that had been doomed from the start? As I sat there on the floor of his closet, surrounded by pieces of a life I had never known, I felt the foundations of my world crumble. The walls of the home we had built together suddenly felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of secrets I had never been meant to discover. The woman in the photograph had taken what I had always longed for. She had been his light, his happiness, his forever. And I was just the woman who came after, left to live in the shadow of a love that was never mine to begin with. That night, I could no longer carry the weight of what I had discovered. The photograph, the letters, the ring. Each piece of his hidden past felt like a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. I knew I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep smiling, couldn't keep swallowing my questions, couldn't keep living in the shadow of a woman I didn't know but who clearly still lived inside his heart. So, with trembling hands and a voice that wavered, I confronted him. We sat across from each other in the quiet of our bedroom, the air thick with tension. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the seconds of silence that stretched endlessly between us. My heart pounded, my throat ached, but I forced myself to speak. I told him about the drawer, about the letters, the photographs, and the ring. My words spilled out in broken fragments, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and desperation. I demanded answers not just about her but about us. For hours he said nothing. He sat with his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly together, his eyes fixed on the floor. The silence was unbearable, a mirror of the silence that had haunted our marriage from the very beginning. Every second he refused to speak felt like a punishment, as though he were locking me out of his world once again. I wanted him to deny it, to tell me it wasn't what it seemed, to reassure me that I mattered to him. But he stayed quiet, and with each passing moment my hope grew smaller. Finally, when the silence felt as though it might crush me completely, he lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw and unguarded in them, pain deep and consuming. His lips parted, and in a whisper so faint I almost didn't hear it, he spoke the truth. "I loved her," he said. The words sliced through me like a blade. He went on, his voice breaking. "She died before we could marry. I can't move on. I can't touch anyone else." The room spun around me as his confession settled into my heart. Suddenly everything made sense. The distance, the silence, the absence of intimacy. It wasn't that he didn't want love or that he didn't want me. It was that he was trapped in a love story that had ended too soon. One that had never released him. His heart was still with her, frozen in time, locked in the memory of a future they never had the chance to live. I sat in stunned silence, my tears falling freely. Part of me wanted to reach for him, to comfort him in his grief. To lose someone you love so deeply, so suddenly, is a pain I couldn't even imagine. And yet, another part of me ached with betrayal. Because while his grief was real, it had also stolen my life, my marriage, my chance at being loved fully. He had married me while still belonging to her. And that realization broke me in ways I couldn't put into words. His eyes glistened as he spoke, his voice filled with anguish. He told me about the day she died, about how his world had shattered, about how he had promised himself he would never give his heart away again. And he hadn't. Even as he stood beside me at the altar, even as he wore the ring I had slipped onto his finger, his heart had remained buried with her. Listening to him was like watching someone confess to a crime without realizing it was a crime at all. He spoke of love, but every word felt like a knife in my chest. He spoke of loss, but all I could feel was my own. Because in loving her so completely, he had left nothing for me. That night, as his words lingered in the air, I felt my world collapse in a different way. It wasn't anger that consumed me, it was grief. Grief for the marriage I thought I had. Grief for the love I would never truly receive. Grief for the years I had spent blaming myself, never knowing that the real reason for his silence was not me, but the ghost of a woman who would always stand between us. I realized then that I had been competing with a memory, with a woman who would never age, never falter, never lose his devotion. She was perfect in his mind, immortalized by death, and no matter what I did, I could never replace her. As he finished speaking, silence returned to the room, heavier than before. He had given me the truth, but it was not the truth I had wanted. It was a truth that left me broken, staring at the man I had married and realizing he had never truly been mine. Tears streamed down my face as the truth sank deeper into my heart. For so long I had believed I was unwanted. I had thought maybe I wasn't beautiful enough, not attractive enough, not worthy of his love or affection. I had blamed myself for his silence, for his distance, for the empty nights we spent lying side by side yet feeling worlds apart. But now I finally understood. I wasn't unwanted. I wasn't unloved because of who I was. I was living in the shadow of a ghost. That ghost was the woman he had loved before me. The woman he had lost to death but never let go of. She wasn't alive, yet she was everywhere. She was in the way he pulled back from me, in the way his eyes grew distant when I reached for him, in the way he never allowed himself to give me his whole heart. She lived in his memories, in his silence, in the hidden drawer with letters and photographs that told me more about his soul than he had ever shared with me. I realized then that I had been fighting a battle I could never win. I had been competing with a memory, with perfection frozen in time. A living woman can make mistakes, can falter, can disappoint. But a woman who exists only in memory remains flawless. She becomes untouchable. A symbol of pure love that no one else can ever measure up to. I was fighting for a love that never even belonged to me. A love that had ended before I even entered his life. The pain of that realization crushed me. My tears weren't just for the truth I had uncovered. They were for all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, thinking I wasn't enough. They were for all the times I had smiled through the whispers of neighbors, for all the times I had told myself to be patient, that love would come if I just waited long enough. I had built my world on the hope that one day, his heart would open to me. But his heart wasn't locked, it was buried 6 feet under, with the woman he had called my forever. I thought about the years we had spent together, about the moments that now seemed like lies. The way he held my hand in public, the way he smiled for pictures, the way he spoke the right words to make others believe we were happy. I had convinced myself those gestures meant something, but now I knew they were only shadows of what he had once felt for her. His true love, his true passion, his true intimacy had been given to someone else. What I received were fragments, echoes, leftovers from a heart that no longer had room for me. It was almost unbearable to think about. To know that while I had been pouring all of myself into this marriage, he had been holding back. To know that while I had been dreaming of a future together, he had been living in the past. To know that while I had been begging for his love had already been promised to another, a woman who would forever remain untouchable. And yet, as broken as I felt, I couldn't hate him. How could I? His pain was real, his grief genuine. He hadn't chosen to lose her, and he hadn't chosen to be haunted by her memory. But that didn't change the reality I faced. His heart was still hers, and I was nothing more than a companion in a life he had never fully wanted to live. My tears blurred everything around me, but inside I saw with clarity for the first time. I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the reason for the silence, the distance, the lack of intimacy. I wasn't unloved because I was unworthy. I was unloved because his love had already been spent, given away long before I ever walked into his life. And so, as the tears continued to fall, I grieved not just for what I had lost, but for what I had never truly had. I grieved for the marriage that had been nothing more than an illusion, for the years I had wasted fighting for something that had never belonged to me. Most of all, I grieved for myself, for the woman who had believed she was unwanted, when in truth she had simply been trying to live in the shadow of a ghost. I spent weeks trapped in a storm of emotions, torn between pity and anger. My heart ached with compassion for the man I had married. I pitied him for the pain he carried, for the love he had lost, for the ghost that haunted his every breath. He wasn't cruel to me. He wasn't unkind. He never raised his voice or his hand, yet he had built walls so high around his heart that I could never climb them, no matter how hard I tried. I could see his sorrow written on his face, in the faraway look in his eyes, in the way he avoided closeness as though it might betray the memory of the woman he once loved. A part of me wanted to hold him tighter, to comfort him, to remind him that he was still alive and so was I. But another part of me, the louder, angrier part, felt betrayed. I was his wife, and yet I lived like a stranger in my own marriage. I had given him my vows, my loyalty, my body, and my future, but he had given me only silence. I was starving for affection, craving intimacy, longing for even the simplest touch, yet he acted as if those needs didn't exist, as if my heart and body weren't crying out for connection. And that anger boiled inside me, whispering questions I didn't want to face. Was this really love? Was this really marriage? Or was I simply living beside a man who could never truly see me? Every night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same questions over and over. Could I live like this forever? Could I survive a lifetime of being married but untouched, unseen, unloved? The words echoed in my mind, taunting me with their cruelty. Marriage was supposed to be about partnership, about sharing joys and burdens, about closeness that no one else in the world could give. Yet mine was filled with emptiness. My nights were cold, my days were lonely, and my soul felt invisible. Sometimes I tried to convince myself that love was about sacrifice, that perhaps patience would heal him, that time would break down the walls around his heart. But 2 years had already passed and nothing had changed. If anything, the silence between us had only grown heavier. I worried that if I continued down this road, I would disappear altogether. My laughter had faded, my confidence had dimmed, and my reflection in the mirror no longer looked like the woman I used to be. I was becoming a shadow of myself, living in the background of my own life. I pitied him, yes, but what about me? Didn't I deserve love too? Didn't I deserve to be seen, to be touched, to be cherished? These questions tore me apart because the answers were obvious, yet I was too afraid to admit them. If I admitted the truth, I would have to make a choice. And that choice terrified me. To leave him felt like abandoning a broken man, like betraying the vows I had made. But to stay with him felt like betraying myself. So I lived in limbo, caught between pity and anger, compassion and resentment. Some days my heart softened, and I told myself to wait, to hope, to believe that one day he would return my love. Other days my anger hardened me, and I felt ready to walk away, ready to reclaim the pieces of myself I had lost in this marriage. But the decision never came. Instead, I kept circling around the same question, the one that burned inside me no matter how hard I tried to silence it. Could I really live like this forever? Could I endure a life where I was legally bound to someone who treated me more like a roommate than a wife? The uncertainty consumed me, and each passing day felt heavier than the last. My pity chained me to him, but my anger pushed me away. And in the middle of it all, I remained stuck, unloved, untouched, and unseen, wondering if my life was slipping away while I stood still in the ruins of a marriage that had never truly begun. One morning, everything inside me finally broke. I woke up and realized I couldn't live in silence anymore. My body felt heavy, my chest ached, and my spirit was exhausted. For weeks I had wrestled with the same questions, circling around pity, anger, and despair. But on that morning, as the sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains, I felt a strange clarity settle over me. I knew I couldn't keep waiting for him to change. I couldn't keep hoping for a love that would never come. My life was slipping away, and if I didn't take a step now, I might lose myself forever. With trembling hands, I pulled a suitcase from the back of the closet. The sound of its zipper felt louder than thunder in the quiet of the room. Each piece of clothing I folded and placed inside felt like a piece of my heart being torn away from the life I had built. I wasn't just packing clothes, I was packing up memories, disappointments, and broken dreams. Every shirt and dress carried whispers of nights spent in loneliness, of smiles I had faked, of questions left unanswered. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept moving. I thought of him as I packed. The man who had once promised me love and companionship, the man who had taken vows beside me, but who had never truly let me into his world. I thought of his haunted eyes, his silence, the ghost of a woman who had held his heart long before I came along. Part of me still pitied him. Part of me still wanted to reach for him and beg him to live again. But I knew I couldn't sacrifice my entire life waiting for him to come back from a past he refused to leave. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it shut with a finality that made my hands shake even harder. My legs felt weak, but my decision was firm. I walked to the bed where he still slept, his face calm in dreams, unaware of the storm raging inside me. For a long moment I stood there staring at him, wondering if he would ever understand why I had to go. Then I picked up a small piece of paper and a pen. My hands trembled so much that the words almost blurred as I wrote them. But I knew what I needed to say. I didn't want to leave in anger, and I didn't want to wound him with cruel words. I wanted him to know the truth I had carried in my heart for so long. So I wrote, "You deserve your memories, but I deserve a life." Those words were my goodbye, my confession, my release. He deserved the right to grieve, to hold on to his lost love if that was what he chose. I couldn't take that away from him. But I too deserved something: happiness, love, warmth. A life where I was more than a shadow in someone else's story. For the first time in years, I wasn't blaming myself. I wasn't begging for scraps of affection. I was choosing me. I placed the note gently on his pillow, right where his head would rest when he woke. My tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink, but the words were still clear. I stood there for one last moment, memorizing his face, my heart torn between love and sorrow. Then I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and took a deep breath. Stepping outside felt like walking into a new world. Terrifying, uncertain, but also freeing. I didn't know what my future would look like. I didn't know where I would go or how I would rebuild. But I knew this. I was no longer going to live unseen, untouched, unloved. My life was my own, and it was time to claim it. As I walked out of that house for the very last time, I carried with me a weight I could barely put into words. The walls behind me had witnessed my silence, my tears, and my unspoken prayers. They had been a prison, holding me in a life where love was only an illusion. A life where I was more ghost than woman. Each step I took away from that place felt like tearing away a piece of myself. Pain rose in my chest, sharp and undeniable, as I thought of the vows I had once believed in, the promises I had clung to, and the dreams that had slowly withered in the shadows of a love that was never mine. Yet, alongside the pain, there was something else, something new, something I had almost forgotten how to feel. Relief. It was subtle at first, like a faint whisper in the back of my mind, but with every step it grew louder. I was no longer bound by a marriage that had only offered me loneliness. I was no longer pretending to be happy for the world while slowly breaking apart inside. I was no longer living in the shadow of a woman who had died years ago, yet still owned the heart of the man I had married. For the first time in 2 years, the chains had fallen and I could breathe. The mix of pain and relief was confusing. One moment I wanted to collapse on the ground and cry until I had no tears left. The next, I wanted to spread my arms wide and run forward, as if I could finally catch the freedom I had been longing for. My heart ached for what I had lost, but it also fluttered with hope for what might come. It was as though I stood between two worlds, the world of yesterday, heavy with sorrow, and the world of tomorrow, glowing with possibility. As the house disappeared behind me, I realized something important. My story hadn't ended. For so long, I had told myself that my life was over, that I was trapped, that my fate had already been sealed by his silence. But walking away showed me the truth. Endings can also be beginnings. The life I had known had ended, yes, but my life as a woman who chose herself was only just beginning. For the first time, I wasn't waiting on someone else to decide my worth. I was deciding it for myself. Freedom didn't come without fear. I didn't know where I would go next or how I would rebuild. I didn't have all the answers, and part of me trembled at the uncertainty of it all. But even in that fear, there was courage. Because freedom isn't about knowing every step ahead. It's about taking the first one, even when your hands shake and your heart races. And that morning, with my bag in hand and the cool air brushing my face, I had taken that step. I thought about the last 2 years and how they had changed me. They had broken me in ways I never expected, but they had also taught me strength. I had endured nights of loneliness, whispers of gossip, the sting of rejection, and the weight of living with a man who loved someone who no longer existed. And yet, here I was, still standing, still breathing, still capable of choosing something better. Pain had tried to destroy me, but instead, it had shaped me into a woman who finally knew her worth. As I kept walking, the tears on my cheeks began to dry, and a small smile tugged at my lips. It wasn't a smile of joy, not yet, but it was a smile of hope. Hope that tomorrow could be brighter. Hope that love, real love, might still exist somewhere for me. Hope that even if no one else ever gave it to me, I could learn to give it to myself. And so, as I stepped forward into the unknown, I whispered to myself, This is not the end. This is the beginning. For the first time in 2 years I was free.